Good morning. Thank you so much for doing this. You're
Pleasure.
a little bit busy these days.
A lovely audience here.
Great audience, always a great audience. We were just talking backstage a little bit. You've been around the block a few times with this president. How different is 45 versus 47?
Quantum leap, I would say.
Quantum leap.
Quantum leap. Here's the thing. I am one of only 3 people who was with the boss from the 2016 campaign all the way till now. So Stephen Miller, who you may, anybody heard of? You might have known Stephen.
I think a few people know that name.
And Dan Scavino, who is the president's great tweetmeister, or now truthmeister, as the case may be.
Ex-meister?
Back then, we were at the bottom of the learning curve, and there was tremendous resistance, not among the American people, but among the media, the intellectual elites of this country to the president's agenda.
And Republicans.
I include them in that whole ball of wax. And the things we were able to do then with respect, for example, to the historic China tariffs, to renegotiating the SHAFTA-NAFTA treaty, solar, things like that, the deregulation, all of that was met with skepticism initially. And it turned out to be the road to prosperity. But it was a tough road. There's a lot of bumps in that road, a lot of potholes, a lot of curves. This time we're at the top of the learning curve, and you've seen the president on day one sign over 200 executive orders. He's hitting the ground running. In terms of personnel, the great Sergio Gore, who I came to know as the publisher of one of my books, and he's a great friend of the president. He's doing an amazing job with personnel. We've got more people already in the bureaucracy than we had at this time. And most importantly, I think that the American public wants what the president is moving forward on. Border security, I think, was a huge part of why he got elected, and also the fair trade issues. So we're moving at warp speed, and it's good for the American people. It's going to be a golden age, Dasha, I think. And as he says, let's see what happens.
Well, I got to tell you, when it was announced that you were sitting down with us, I got a lot of people coming up to me very excited to hear from you because of everything that we've seen in the last 24 to 48 hours. This is a very timely interview. You guys are a lucky bunch here because I think everyone is curious to hear directly from you. So take us behind the scenes a little bit here, because we were moments away from tariffs on Canada, and then suddenly things changed. What can you tell us about that phone call with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? How did all of that play out?
I think what's important to start with is day one. We were in the Oval. He had signed hundreds of executive orders. And the second to last order he signed was the America First Trade Policy Presidential Memorandum. And Dasha, what that did, and I would urge everybody here to look at that if you're curious about the trajectory of trade policy. It set down across like 15 different dimensions all the different things the president intends to do in trade policy. If you're talking about global tariff, that was the first section. Everything we're doing is going to be data-driven. That presidential memo sets forth a requirement to do investigative studies to kind of level set everything, see where we're going, but there's currency manipulation, there's export controls, there's discussions about getting the steel and aluminum tariffs repaired. So that's the context for what's going on right now with respect to Mexico, Canada, and China. And I think whenever you folks are listening, watching the media, reading about it in the paper, I think the biggest failure of the media is when they talk about tariffs, they're always kind of warning you about the downside rather than explaining why. And in this particular case, Dasha. The why is 75,000 Americans dying every year from deadly fentanyl that originates as precursor chemicals in China, that is processed by Mexican drug cartels, both in Mexico and in Canada, and comes across the border not just as fentanyl, but also as particles of fentanyl that spikes everything from heroin and speed to cocaine. So what's happening as you see this is the president fighting a drug war. This is not a trade war. Media immediately came out and talking trade war and this, that, and the other thing. This particular action is a drug war. And what we've seen is a lot of pearl clutching when this was announced, but we've also seen immediate results from Mexico and Canada. Now, the Mexicans have been very cooperative, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, love the guy. And I want to talk about the broader trade team in a minute, if you wouldn't mind. But he has done a very good job, along with Stephen Miller and personnel at DHS, going through a checklist of things that we need from Mexico. So we're making progress on that front, hence the 30-day extension. Prime Minister Trudeau, his initial reaction was the kind of similar reaction we got back during the first term. It's like, okay, we're going to tariff you if you tariff us, and we're going to go up that ladder. And I think he looked at the problem. He looked at what Mexico was willing to do. And I think he came to understand that this is a drug war, not a trade war, that what the president is concerned about in this case is Americans dying. So we got the news yesterday on a call. He was on a call. President, art of the deal. We're getting a fentanyl czar. We're getting billions of dollars spent on this. We're branding terrorists, drug cartels as terrorist organizations. And there's a number of other steps.
A lot of that stuff from Canada, though, was sort of already in the works. And I'm curious what's going on with the Canada of this, because Canada and Mexico, when it comes to the drug war and when it comes to immigration, two very different stories. I mean, only 2.2% of U.S. border fentanyl seizures are at the Canadian border. I mean, customs agents seized 43 pounds of fentanyl at the Canadian border in the last fiscal year, compared to 21,000 pounds in Mexico. So what's he really after with Canada?
So interesting you say that. The problem is, first of all, that the Mexican drug cartels are rapidly expanding in Canada, and that's a danger. Second of all, there was something, I don't know if you noticed this, it kind of went unnoticed by much of the press, but there's a thing called de minimis. Are you familiar with that?
Explain. Okay.
See, this is the buried lead. De minimis is a rule that says that anything of $800 or less that comes across our borders is not subject to tariffs. And we are sui generis in terms of having that kind of policy. Other countries around the world will do that, but the limit is something like $30 or $20. And so what the cartels in China have done is exploit that loophole to smuggle in not just fentanyl, but all sorts of drugs. And Canada is a leading source of that avenue for drugs. So that what the executive order did in this case, Dasha, is say de minimis is suspended for these three countries, and we're going to be able to examine that. Now, the other thing is, this is not just a drug war, it's a terrorist war and a border invasion war. And these, if you read the executive orders carefully, that's all embedded in that as well, to support the use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And we're in a situation now where almost 100 people have come in through Canada on the terrorist watch list alone. It only takes one to blow something up here. We know that. So Canada's visa issues are big, so we got to kind of deal with that. And the bottom line is the end game. What's the end state? The end state is secure borders, only legal immigrants coming across the borders, countries taking back the illegal aliens that were coming here during the Biden regime, and stopping the slaughter of Americans. I don't know how anybody could disagree with that. The only issue is how we get to that.
Well, do you think businesses see it that way, though, as a drug war, not a trade war, particularly businesses that do a lot of trade and rely heavily on our partnerships with Canada and Mexico? What do you say to American businesses and potentially foreign businesses that want to invest here who are concerned about the uncertainty going forward?
I think it depends on how well we do our job right here.
How well do you think you're doing?
The media does a terrible job. The media.
But how well are you doing? Because Trump said he was going to.
Let me finish the thought. The media does a terrible job covering trade issues, because the first thing out of their mouth is there's going to be a problem. The one I told you I was going to do this.
That was not the first thing out of my mouth, sir.
No, I'm not accusing you.
Well, but let me ask you this, and I'll let you read your quote.
Make this point.
All right,
okay.
make the point.
All right, so again, this is from 2016 from Politico. Typical story. I'm not picking on you guys, because this would be a story that would be New York Times, Washington Post, all the nightly news, okay? Donald Trump's presidency would significantly weaken the country, driving the U.S. into a lengthy recession with nearly 3.5 million job losses, 7% unemployment rate, according to Moody Analytics. Okay, so Politico writes that. The reality was real GDP increased almost 3% in 2018. Household income went, and of course, as you know, you may have noticed, we had price stability. So what's happening now as this story unfolds is, rather than talk about it being a drug war, rather than a trade war, rather than talking about all the Americans dying, rather than talking about the threats from terrorism, rather than talking about how illegal alien crime on American citizen crime is out of control, rather than talking about how real wages are going down, and in the government statistics of our own government, which shows millions of illegal aliens have displaced American workers, all we hear about is the danger of a trade war and threats to our economy. And that's wrong, because what we have here, what's different here, your first question, what's different? What's different is we have the experience of the first term, historic tariffs on China, historic renegotiations of trade deals, solar, steel, and aluminum tariffs. All we got was prosperity and no inflation.
But a lot of those deals were focused on the economy, and I think so much of his promises on the campaign trail were about getting the American economy back, lowering prices for American families, making it easier for businesses to operate here. I want to read you a quote. An economic researcher sent me this. He said that he has talked about tariffs as a replacement for income taxes, as essential for U.S. manufacturing, as a means of coercion for his territorial ambitions. Now they just spent a bargaining chip for small gains on drug interdiction. Has ambition been tempered by reality here? This is a researcher at Hart Research.
Yeah, okay. So you met my research team back there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I asked I got some folks work with me in the office, and they are busy compiling a list of everything everybody said about Trump's first term in the media, on the Hill, and everywhere in between. And it's like reams of data about how people say that kind of stuff, and it just doesn't match with reality. I think this is probably be a good time to make this point. We, the United States of America, as President Trump says as often as he can, is the world sucker. We have the lowest tariffs in the world. That's a fact. We have the lowest non-tariff barriers in the world. That's a fact. We run a $1 trillion a year trade deficit, which has, among other bad things besides shipping off our factories and jobs, that's like transferring $1 trillion of American assets to foreigners, many of whom are not our friends, every single year. And we do nothing about that, nothing. And the consequences of that are millions of jobs lost, tens of thousands of factories shut, and a world in which we used to have blue-collar folks living behind white picket fences, many of them, particularly in the swing states, Dasha, are divorced, alcohol, drug addicts, or dead. So the context for the president's fair trade agenda is simply to have fair trade. The president today talked about how Europe is sticking it to us with their VAT tax, and we run a $350 billion deficit, and they won't buy our cars. Japan, you ever see an American car in Tokyo? You ever? No, you don't see that. Why?
So to that point, these concessions that we got from Canada and Mexico are not concessions on the economy.
Why do you think they're minor? And besides, it's a 30-day thing. It's like, this is the kind of spin. Why? I thought it was from the Wall Street Journal, because they came out with that crap. 10,000 more troops on the border in Mexico, another 10,000 in Canada. A fentanyl czar. They agree that drug cartels are terrorist organization.
So in 30 days, is he going to ask for more concessions on the economy? What happens in
What's the boss's 3 favorite words? You know what's that. Let's see what happens, right? That's 4, actually. I know you were doing that.
None of us
That'll
are
be the headline tomorrow. Navarro gets his numbers wrong.
No, but I think it's a valid question from, again, particularly...
Reframe the question. I don't quite understand what you're asking.
Okay, the question being, Trump ran on economic promises in addition to immigration. These concessions from Canada and Mexico potentially deal with a drug problem and an immigration problem. Is he going to escalate to also ask them for concessions on economic issues, not immigration issues?
So,
why is it a drug war, not a trade war, I guess?
First of all, let's talk about the word concessions. I mean, look, among nations, what I love about President Trump, among other things, is he's able to talk candidly to world leaders, and they respect him. And so when you call something like that a concession, I think that diminishes Mexico and Canada in a way, which is not really productive. What Canada and Mexico have agreed to do is begin to enter into a dialogue and specific actions to deal with 75,000 Americans getting killed every day, terrorists coming in, and a border invasion. And that's a good start, but it's a 30-day interim period. Now, to your question about what about all these other issues like the trade deficit and economic issues, I refer you back to the presidential memo on day one. I refer you all to that, and we're going to handle the problems that unfair trade inflict, and that's the proper word, upon the American people through a dozen different kinds of approaches. In this particular case, this IEPA action is designed expressly and explicitly to deal with a drug war, and that's what that one does. That doesn't rule out doing other things on many other things, and so all you got to do is see how it's going to unfold. I can say that the first 100 days are laid out in that. I think it's probably a good time to talk about the team here, if I may, Dasha, because what's important about the trade team is it delegates different kind of tasks and authorities to each of the different ones. So you have Howard Lutnick is the Commerce Secretary nominee, and his vote comes up next week. He's going to take point on a lot of the tariff issues, particularly what we call the 232 things that have to do with things like steel and aluminum, essential medicines, critical minerals, and the like. And the issue there is that are we in a position as a country where imports are harming the ability of us to produce those things in a way which threatens the safety and security of the country. So he's going to be handling stuff like that. You go to Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. I happen to know Scott well. He actually was the publisher of my first Trump book memoir, the In Trump Time one. I got to know Scotty really well. The guy is Howard and Scott. They're the new blood. They are like geniuses in their own right. It's a delight to work with them. Scott will handle things like the CFIUS, which governs what foreigners can buy things, the currency manipulation, things like that. You got Jameson Greer. He was Bob Lighthizer lieutenant, as it were, during the first term. Bob was the United States Trade Representative who renegotiated, under the direction of President Trump, the terrible NAFTA Treaty. And so that's coming up, as the guest earlier talked about the importance. That's up for its 4-year review. And
what will you advocate on that front?
Well, see, the beauty of that is that I don't advocate anything. I let people do their jobs. Jameson will take point on that under the direction of the president, and everybody will have a hand on that. The fourth person to mention is Kevin Hassett. He was the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. He's a superb economist, and he understands the macro aspects of tariffs. We are going to, if President Trump succeeds like he wants to succeed, we are going to structurally shift the American economy from one over-reliant on income taxes and the Internal Revenue Service to one which is also reliant on tariff revenues and the External Revenue Service.
Is that being created?
This is going to be, it's in the presidential memo, and that's going to be under Howard Lutnick's and Scott Bessent's thing, and it's a beautiful thing. Here's the thing, Dasha. Prior to 1913, I don't know if you know this, probably nobody knows this unless you're a hardcore looker, this government, the United States, was built on tariffs. Jefferson, Hamilton, McKinley. McKinley ran on a platform. I'm a tariff man running on a tariff platform. And Boss has this great chart, right? Imagine this, where it shows the percentage of revenue from tariffs.
He loves
of the
his
government.
charts.
It's up there, right? And it's like near 100%. It goes along like this, and then we pass the income tax, and it goes just like this, flat lines. And the point is that tariff revenues are going to play a very important role, and it's going to be part of a long-term transition. See, as President Trump loves to say, countries don't have to pay tariffs if they invest here.
Well, let's talk about China, because that is a big factor here. I'm curious why 10% for China, an adversary, but 25% for an ally like Canada.
Well, it's the size of the market and the economy. And we already have substantial tariffs on communist China.
Yeah, Trump talked about, on the campaign trail, about 60% tariffs on China. Is that still on the table?
Again, I urge everybody to read that presidential memorandum and understand that we are going to proceed in a measured way using investigative studies that will be foundational to the actions taken. Everything is going to be data-driven.
60% isn't super measured, so that's not likely now?
And in that memo, Dasha, what Jameson Greer is going to do as the USTR is he's going to go back and recalibrate the Section 301 tariffs on China and see exactly what they've been doing. Have they lived up to the Phase 1 agreement that they signed? Have they stopped what I at one point called the 7 deadly sins, things like intellectual property and currency manipulation, the use of state-owned enterprise? But this is going to be done in a measured way, and it's going to be done in a way that will benefit the American people. And we're not going to get headlines speculating about what the president may or may not do. We're going to let him do his thing, because by now it's trust in Trump. This is the latest example of when he does stuff and it looks like things are a little chaotic. It's not. It's genius, and he delivers. And that's what...
So the chaos is not chaos, is what you're saying?
Not to us.
Let me ask, China announced retaliatory tariffs, right? They're talking about levies of 15% for U.S. coal and LNG, 10% for crude oil, farm equipment, some autos, imposing export controls on 5 key metals, a probe into Google. What should American businesses that rely on these goods prepare for?
Let's see what happens with the call today. We could have sat here yesterday and you would have said the same thing about Mexico
So there's
or
a
Canada.
possibility that China gets an extension and a delay as well?
It's up to the boss. I never get ahead for the boss. That's why I'm sitting here. If I got ahead of the boss, I never would have lasted this long.
The president also told reporters recently that import taxes will definitely happen with the EU and possibly the UK as well. What could that look like and how soon could that happen?
Let's see what happens. It's part of the presidential.
Oh, Peter.
Look, I'm part of a trade team that is the finest trade team ever assembled. It's a definite upgrade from the last time around. We're all pulling in the same direction, and we've got a combination of several newcomers and 3 seasoned veterans. And we're going to go through the presidential memorandum agenda, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. But you just got to be patient.
Oh, we're not good at that.
No scoops here today.
Are universal tariffs?
No scoops.
Are universal tariffs still on the table?
The first section of the presidential memorandum makes it clear that we are studying the damages that are caused by a $1 trillion trade deficit. The president will figure out what to do about that if the study indicates that there are significant damages, and it's mentioned right in that the possibility of supplementary global tariffs. Yes. The president has made no secret about it, but let's not, again, we got to be measured about this.
Well, the reason I asked,
both in the media and everybody else, because all that happens is people get stirred up, and then you figure out, well, oh wow, that was pretty good. Now we're a step closer now to fewer Americans dying from fentanyl. Whereas yesterday it was like everybody's. So I'm just. Yeah.
No, but people get stirred up because you also
relax.
see, markets reacting. You see real impact in the financial sector. There are businesses that I've been talking to who say, look, we're behind Trump. We're supportive of him, but the uncertainty is a challenge. It's difficult for businesses to make decisions and for American families to make decisions when they don't know where things are headed.
Before I came here, I was on Maria in the Morning on Fox Business.
Did she scoop me?
Fox, not at all. But she did provide the answer to this question. I'm going to give it to you. And it's just, it's 400 North Capitol. It's a 10-minute walk over here. And the point I made there is that when you get all these day traders and all this volatility in the market, and the market goes up or down, whatever, on all of these rumors that the media loves to throw at you in big headlines, rather than kind of look more deeper at the thing. My point here, Dasha, is that what is happening with respect to the trade agenda is happening within the broader context of a larger economic agenda that points inexorably towards growth, rising real wages, and stability. And let me just walk you through it. I remember it was one of the most fun days I ever had. It was the day after the election in 2016, and got about 2 minutes of sleep, and I'm on Squawk Box, CNBC, and I get in the chair, and Andrew, Becky, and Joe are, they want to eat me alive because the futures are dead red down. It looks like the market's going to totally melt down because nobody expected Trump to win. And it's like I get on there, and it's like, all right, let's look at the chessboard here. Okay, what is Donald Trump going to do? It's like 4 wheels on the Ferrari here. You're going to have the strategic energy dominance and cheap oil, right? And that's exactly what he's going to do this time. And that's going to be the biggest inflation fighter we're going to have. We're going to let me finish the 4. This is important. Deregulation. We're going to hit that again, but also add a Doge component. That's what we call a positive supply shock. That's good for all the businesses who are concerned. Cheaper oil. And cheaper oil, by the way, isn't just cheaper gasoline prices and home heating oil prices. It's cheaper fertilizer prices. It's all across. Then it's the tax burden, which is going to be lowered, and which is going to be lowered, by the way, by the ability to use tariff revenues in the negotiations with Congress to what they call score that. And then the fair trade to the, again, if you do the math, if you're like a geek and you know this, it's like when you run a trade deficit, that's a direct subtraction to the real GDP growth rate, if you just do that. So if you lower the trade deficit, you get growth. So the point here is that as all of this trade policy goes forward, you're going to have all these other elements of the Trump agenda pushing our economy forward in a way which is going to simultaneously create prosperity and reduce inflation. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's what I try to assure businesses about.
Well, that's a good point. But when you see strategy in the chaos, not every business sees it that way. The markets don't love uncertainty. Businesses don't love uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen 30 days from now with Mexico and Canada. Do you worry that this whiplash we've witnessed could discourage investment? Like, why would businesses invest in new factories, hire workers, when they don't know how this is going to unfold?
My point here, if you remember anything, this is it. My point here is that the media itself is in part responsible for the chaos because it doesn't accurately report two things. One, the broader, the broader context that these policies are happening in, and the fact that in the first term of the Trump administration, none of these sky or falling kind of things happened.
But you said this is night and day. It's very different.
It is night and day, and one of the reasons it's night and day is every time somebody says in the media that the sky's going to fall, I go, wait a minute, you said that, and I can give you a date where you said that back in 2017 or 2018 or 2019, and you were wrong.
To the American people, sir, who voted for President Trump because they wanted lower prices, they wanted a stronger economy, can you promise American families that this tariff strategy is not going to lead to higher costs for them?
Drill, baby, drill, deregulation, tax cuts. Let's walk through the tariffs.
Can you make that promise to the American people,
Let's make the tariffs. Am I a candidate for any office here? No, I'm not.
You're making big decisions.
Let me work you through the economics and try to explain why we didn't have inflation the last time, okay? This is important. It's a simple point. Because everybody said we were going to have inflation, right? China and all that stuff. So let's.
I appreciate you wanting to talk about last time, but we do have limited time. I'm just wondering if you
let me
can
make this point.
That promise.
I can make this point that when we put a tariff on as the biggest market in the world on a country that is heavily export dependent, the first thing that happens is they reduce their prices. The second thing that happens is supply chains move around in a way to moderate any inflationary effects. The third thing that happens is we get more investment here, not there. That creates jobs and improved wages here. So what I can assure you of, what I can promise you is that the president's agenda will create a golden age of prosperity. Real wages will go up as they did in the first term of the Trump administration while they went down in Biden's. We'll have robust GDP growth, and we'll have security here from the steps that are taken, not just national security, as we like to say in the White House. Economic security is national security.
So we're running out of time, so I just have a couple more questions. The president did acknowledge himself that tariffs and some of his policies may come with some pain. He said that in a Truth Social post. So should American people prepare to make some sacrifices in the short term for this longer term vision he has?
Look, all I can say is that the plans we have in place will lead to price stability far more than they had during the Biden regime, and prosperity. And again, you can't isolate the trade and not think about $50 a barrel oil. Look, we had around $50 a barrel oil through the Trump term. You know what it was during Biden's? It was like 75 to 80. You know what a price shock that is? I mean, drill, baby, drill. Again, the personnel of this administration are unparalleled. You got Doug Burgum, who I had the great pleasure meeting while we were working on the Canada-Mexico drug war issue, and Chris Wright at Energy. I mean, it's going to be a golden age, as the president says. That's what I can promise.
So what is the lesson, big picture, that we in this room, that American families, that businesses, and our trading partners should take away from the last 24 hours?
Trust in Trump. He's earned that. Trust in Trump. You saw what he did with trade policy in the first term. You saw what he did over the last 24 to 48 hours. This is how we roll, as it were. And let's remember where this started, Dasha. 75,000 Americans. I mean, somebody raise your hand if you don't know somebody who hasn't died of fentanyl. Everybody in this room knows somebody either close to them or a friend of a friend who has died of a drug overdose and probably fentanyl. That's astonishing. And we say no more, no mas. That ain't going to happen under Donald Trump. So that's what this particular round is about. It's a drug war, not a trade war.
Well, and tangentially, big picture, what is the goal with the tariff strategy? Is it purely a negotiating tactic, or is he trying to remake some fundamentals of the American economy?
Well, the goal of the trade policy, tariffs are but one tool of the trade policy, is to make sure that American workers and families face a level playing field in the international environment. And that'll be measured by the jobs and factories that are created and by the fall from $1 trillion a year trade deficit down to zero. And you'll see the rise of the External Revenue Service, and you'll be less hounded by the Internal Revenue Service. And those tariffs are going to pay for things like no tax on tips. And
is that still happening?
Oh, that's happening.
You can promise that?
And you take that to the bank. That I can promise you.
Is there a potential for a boy who cried wolf problem if you threaten tariffs back down, threaten tariffs back down, if that the pattern that we're seeing here? Could you get into that cycle?
Not with Donald Trump. If Joe Biden or Barack Obama or anybody else tried it, but I mean, look, people.
Because he's willing to go through with it?
We are at war around the world because foreign leaders didn't respect or fear Joe Biden. Think about that. With one change, it was like Reagan coming in for Carter. Hostages immediately released. Peace. You got to remember here, first term, you asked me about what's different. First term, we didn't have any wars. North Korea wasn't shooting missiles up in the air, testing their missiles or setting off bombs so that they could take out Seattle. Iran, we almost broke them and they were quiet. Russia didn't invade anybody. We dealt at least partially with the China issue on trade and would have finished that in a second term. So that's the thing, Dasha. The beauty of all this is that amidst all this speculation, Donald Trump has a record. Trust in Trump.
Let's look a little shorter term before I let you go. In 30 or so
days. You keep saying that, doesn't you? Have you noticed that? Just one more question.
I know, it is my,
We're at 0 on the clock.
we're at 0 on the clock. I've kept you too long.
Yeah,
You've got
okay.
too much to share with us. I promise you this is
It's not like I don't have anything to do today.
we've got you trapped here.
Help the boss save the free world here, and you know, there's just one. Go ahead.
All right.
One more question.
One more question, I'll let you
All right,
go.
it better be good, and you be the judge of that, okay?
So
no pressure here.
30 days,
Yeah.
30 days. Some of the challenges that we've heard from our Canadian counterparts is that what the president wanted from them was somewhat vague. They came up with some of those solutions. Are there metrics you all are using over the course of these next 30 days to figure out, okay, is this working? Do we need to push for more?
Well, that's where Secretary of State Rubio and Secretary Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller and others come. That's where the work of the negotiations go. It's not just phone calls between the top leaders. It's all the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into those kinds of negotiations. And what I would just say to the American people and say to you, it's like you're in very good hands right now. Very good hands. This cabinet is. I can't imagine a finer cabinet right now. The only thing I wish is that that hill behind us there would move a lot damn faster, getting confirmations done, not just at the secretary level, but at the undersecretary, the deputy secretary, the assistant secretary. It's the tragedy of government, of this government, that it takes 18 months to get a government in place. And that's almost half the time of a term of office, and that shouldn't be.
Almost half the time of this interview.
I think you got your money's worth.
Sir.
The check's in the mail, and
Thank you so
my
much for your
pleasure.
time.